Welcome, dear listeners, to Blood on the Holloway Pier, a Miss Marple Murder Mystery. Settle into your favorite armchair with a cup of tea as we journey back to the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s. Here, amid the blooming gardens and gossiping neighbors, our sharp-eyed sleuth, Miss Jane Marple, unravels a puzzling crime. This cozy tale of intrigue and observation is narrated in the classic style of Agatha Christie. Intellectual, comforting, and utterly satisfying. Let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Shadow on the Pier. In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the rolling green hills of England, the autumn of 1952 draped the landscape in a golden haze. The river Mead, a gentle ribbon of silver, wove through meadows dotted with wildflowers and ancient oaks, its banks kissed by morning mists that curled like delicate lace. The villagers cherished their tranquil rhythms. The baker's oven warming the dawn, the clink of milk bottles on doorsteps, and the soft chatter of neighbors exchanging pleasantries over low stone walls. St. Mary Mead was a place where time seemed to pause, where the world beyond felt like a distant dream. Yet, on this particular October morning, that cherished peace shattered like a porcelain teacup dropped on flagstone. Holloway Pier, a modest wooden structure jutting into the river's lazy current, was the heart of the village's quiet recreations. Fishermen cast their lines there. Children launched paper boats, and lovers strolled arm in arm under the stars. It was named for Elias Holloway, the wealthy owner of the village's antique shop, a man whose family had once owned half the land in St. Mary Mead. The pier, weathered but sturdy, bore his name with pride, a testament to his influence. But this morning it bore something far grimmer. At 6:30, as the sun peeked through the mist, young Tommy Baxter, a lad of 14 who delivered newspapers, pedaled his bicycle along the towpath. His whistle echoed cheerily until he reached the pier. A feud from Elias's business dealings. Word of the tragedy reached Miss Jane Marple, the village's elderly spinster, as she sat at her breakfast table in her neat cottage on High Street. Her maid Dolly burst in, her apron askew and her cheeks flushed. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful. Mr. Holloway, stabbed dead on his own pier. They found him just now, with a dagger and all." Dolly's hands fluttered like startled birds as she set the teapot down with a clatter. Miss Marple, her white hair neatly pinned and her blue eyes sharp behind spectacles, paused with her teacup halfway to her lips. "Stabbed, you say, Dolly? How very curious." Her voice was calm, almost serene, but her mind was already turning, like the precise ticking of a grandfather clock. "Tell me everything you heard." Dolly, eager to share, recounted Tommy's discovery and the crowd's gossip. "They say the dagger's one of those fancy ones from his shop, miss, worth a fortune maybe. And the blood? Oh, it's a sight, they say." She shuddered, pouring tea with a splash. Miss Marple sipped thoughtfully, her gaze drifting to the lace curtains fluttering at the window. "A dagger, Dolly, is a dramatic choice. Too dramatic, perhaps. I recall a case in St. Honoré years ago. A man found with a knife, yet the true cause was quite different." She set her cup down, her fingers brushing the embroidered tablecloth. "We mustn't jump to conclusions. Observation is key. Who was near the pier this morning?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "Tommy Baxter, of course, and old Mrs. Pritchett walking her dog. Oh, and Clara Finch, the Holloway's old maid. She was seen by the riverbank looking upset." "Clara Finch," Miss Marple mused, her knitting needles clicking softly as she reached for her work basket. She left their service recently, didn't she? Interesting. Her tone was mild, but her eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity of a hawk spotting movement in the grass. Clara, she recalled, was a mousy girl with a quick temper when provoked, a detail tucked away like a skein of wool. By mid-morning, the village hut lingered on the wood, and the dagger was gone, likely taken for evidence. She noted the pilings slick with river moss, and a faint scuff mark near the edge. Fresh, perhaps, from a shoe. Was there much blood, Constable? He hesitated, glancing at his notebook. Enough, miss. Odd thing, though. The wound didn't seem deep. The doctor's looking now. Miss Marple nodded, her lips pursing slightly. A shallow wound and an ornate dagger. It felt staged, like a play with too obvious props. She recalled a similar case in her youth, where a dramatic weapon masked a subtler crime. And who was close to Mr. Holloway? Family, friends. Fletcher scratched his head. Well, there's Mrs. Lydia Holloway, his wife, elegant lady, always in the tea room. Then Victor Blaine, his business partner at the antique shop. Bit of a nervous sort. Neville Holloway, the nephew just back from London, artist, you know. And Clara Finch, though she's not family. Oh, and Mr. Reginald Thorpe from Danbury, a rival in the antique trade. Heard he and Elias had a row last week. A row? Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. Do tell. Something about a disputed vase. Thorpe claimed Elias sold him a fake. Shouted about it in the Blue Boar, I'm told. Miss Marple filed this away, her mind weaving connections like threads in her knitting. Lydia, Victor, Neville, Clara, Thorpe. Each a stitch in a pattern yet to emerge. She thanked Fletcher and turned toward the village, her steps measured but purposeful. The pier, she sensed, held more than it revealed. The dagger, so ostentatious, seemed a deliberate distraction, like a bright scarf hiding a plain dress. And the blood, too tidy for a violent struggle. Back at her cottage, Dolly had fresh gossip. Mrs. Pritchett says she saw Clara by the river, sipped her tea. Miss Marple's mind turned to the suspects. Lydia, with her poised elegance, might hide a calculating heart. Victor's nervous twitch suggested secrets beyond business disputes. Neville's charm could mask impatience or desperation. Clara's dismissal hinted at personal grievances, and Thorpe's rivalry might run deeper than a single vase. The pier, with its quiet beauty, held the key, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes missed nothing. Not the scuff mark, not the moss, not the whispers of a village stirred by murder. She set her cup down, her smile faint but resolute. We shall see, Dolly, she said softly. The truth, like a good stitch, always comes clear in time. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Tea Room. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, casting dappled shadows through the elms that lined High Street. By late morning, the village pulsed with the quiet energy of gossip, its residents drawn together like bees to a blooming rose. The Blue Boar Inn, with its ivy-clad walls and leaded windows, served as the heart of this buzz. its tea room a haven where secrets were traded as freely as scones and clotted cream. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped and her straw hat tilted just so, made her way there, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the cobblestones. She had no intention of merely sipping tea. The Blue Boar was a stage, and its players, suspects in Elias Holloway's murder, were already gathering. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of fresh-baked bread and brewing Darjeeling. The room hummed with low voices, punctuated by the clink of china and the rustle of starched napkins. Villagers clustered at small tables, their heads bent close, their words a soft murmur of speculation about the grim discovery at Holloway Pier. Miss Marple settled into a corner table by a window, her view commanding the room. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, a prop as much as a pastime, and her blue eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the crowd with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a gem. At a table near the hearth sat Mrs. Lydia Holloway. Slight tilt of her head suggested performance. Grief, Miss Marple knew from years of observation, could be genuine or a mask, and Lydia's seemed a touch too polished. She recalled a case in Much Benham where a widow's tears had hidden a far colder heart. Was Lydia mourning or merely playing the part? Across the room, Victor Blaine, Elias's business partner, stood at the counter, ordering a pot of tea with a nervous twitch of his mouth. He was a man in his mid-40s, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back with pomade. His fingers fidgeted with a gold pocket watch, its surface catching the light as he turned it over and over. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The watch bore initials, EH, not VB. A gift, perhaps, or something less innocent. Victor caught her gaze and offered a tight smile before joining a table of local tradesmen. Elias and I had our disagreements, he said, his voice carrying over the chatter. Mostly about inventory. He was stubborn about pricing those old relics. But murder? Absurd! His laugh was forced and his hand tightened around the watch. Miss Marple made a mental note. Victor's nerves were frayed, and that watch, Elias's, surely suggested more than a business dispute. She remembered a young man in her nephew's village, twitchy like Victor, who had pilfered a family heirloom to cover debts. Greed, she mused, was a thread that often unraveled secrets. The door swung open, admitting Neville Holloway, Elias's nephew, a lanky young man in his early 20s with a mop of dark curls and an artist's careless charm. He wore a tweed jacket, slightly rumpled, and carried a sketchbook under one arm. His arrival drew eyes. Neville had been away in London, painting and carousing, and his return to St. Mary Mead had sparked whispers of prodigality. He flashed a grin at the barmaid, who blushed and slid into a chair near Lydia. "Uncle promised me funds for a studio," he said casually to Mr. Clement, who had moved to my years. "But I'd never." Her voice broke and she turned away, clutching a worn shawl. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward, her knitting a soft rhythm. Clara's resentment was palpable, and her presence in the village after her dismissal was curious. Had she returned for wages owed, or something deeper? Miss Marple recalled a maid in Chipping Cleghorn, wronged and vengeful, whose quiet anger had led to a most unexpected crime. Clara, she decided, warranted watching. The tea room's chatter grew livelier, and Miss Marple sipped her tea, letting the conversations wash over her. She overheard snippets. Mrs. Pritchett, the village busybody, claimed to have seen Clara by the river at dawn, carrying a basket, like she was hiding something. Another villager mentioned Neville sketching near the pier late last night, his lantern flickering oddly. And there was talk of Reginald Thorpe, a rival antique dealer from Danbury who had quarreled with Elias over a rare vase. Thorpe was furious, said the baker, slicing a loaf. Said Elias cheated him. Threatened to ruin him, I heard. Miss Marple's mind wove these threads together. Lydia's lavender, Victor's watch, Neville's sketches, Clara's basket, Thorpe's threats. Each was a clue, small but significant, like the stitches in her knitting. The dagger found by Elias's body, she suspected, was a distraction, its ornate presence too theatrical for a village murder. The true method, perhaps poison, perhaps something subtler, lay hidden in the ordinary, as truth so often did. She rose, tucking her knitting into her bag, and stepped into the crisp autumn air. The river glinted beyond the inn, and the pier, now roped off, seemed to whisper of secrets yet uncovered. Miss Marple's steps were slow but purposeful as she headed toward Holloway's antique emporium, where she hoped to find more than dusty relics. The shop, she knew, was Elias's domain, and its shelves might hold clues as telling as the tea-room's whispers. As she walked, she reflected on St. Mary Mead's deceptively tranquil surface. Beneath it, motives River Mead, which murmured beyond the cottages. The village, though stirred by the morning's grim discovery at Holloway Pier, clung to its routines. The blacksmith's hammer rang, children skipped home from school, and sparrows flitted among the hedgerows. Yet, beneath this veneer of normalcy, tension coiled like a tightly wound spring. Miss Marple, her shawl snug and her cane tapping lightly, felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her progress. Her destination was no mere shop. It was the heart of Elias Holloway's world, and she suspected its cluttered shelves held more than relics of the past. Holloway's antique emporium stood at the edge of the village square, its facade a charming jumble of weathered brick and leaded windows. A brass bell jingled as Miss Marple pushed open the door, stepping into a dim, dusty haven where time seemed to pause. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and old leather, and shelves groaned under the weight of porcelain figurines, gilt-framed mirrors, and ancient tomes bound in cracked vellum. Clocks ticked in uneven chorus, their pendulums swaying like metronomes to a forgotten tune. Behind the counter, Victor Blaine, Elias's business partner, sorted papers with a distracted air, his fingers twitching as they had in the tea room. His sharp suit seemed out of place amid the shop's clutter, and his gold pocket watch, engraved with Elias's initials, dangled from his waistcoat. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blaine," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but laced with quiet authority. "A sad day for the shop, I imagine." Victor started, his eyes darting to her. "Miss Marple?" "Yes, dreadful business. Elias was the soul of this place." He gestured to the shelves, his hand unsteady. "I'm just trying to keep things running. Customers don't stop, you know, even for—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her eyes roaming the shop. "Such a treasure trove," she murmured, pausing by a display of silver candlesticks. Mr. Holloway had a keen eye side. The vial intrigued her. Tonics could conceal more than remedies, as she'd learned in a case years ago involving a poisoned cordial. She moved to a shelf of leather-bound books, her fingers brushing their spines. You and Mr. Holloway must have worked closely. No small disagreements in such a partnership. Victor's laugh was brittle. Well, we had our spats. Pricing, mostly. Elias was stubborn about keeping things too dear. But we managed. His hand strayed to the watch, and Miss Marple's eyes followed. A stolen keepsake, perhaps, or a trophy of resentment. The bell jingled again, and Neville Holloway sauntered in, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. His tweed jacket was more rumpled than in the tea room, and a smudge of charcoal marked his cheek. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said with a roguish grin. "Come to browse Uncle's treasures?" He leaned against a display case, sketching idly, a view of the pier, its pilings stark against the river. "Your uncle's shop is quite the marvel," Miss Marple replied, peering at his sketch. The pier's lines were precise, almost obsessive, with shadows that seemed too dark for a casual study. "You've captured the pier beautifully. Were you sketching there recently?" Neville's pencil paused, his grin faltering. "Last night, actually. Couldn't sleep, so I wandered down. The moonlight's inspiring, you know." He flipped the sketchbook shut, his eyes flicking to Victor. "Uncle drank that tonic like a fiend," he added, nodding at the vial. "Said it kept him sharp." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her mind, though her hands were still. Neville's late-night presence at the pier was no coincidence, and his sketch suggested more than artistic whim. She recalled a young artist in Devon, whose drawings had betrayed a guilty conscience through their detail. "The pier at night must be peaceful," she said lightly. "No one else about?" Neville shrugged too quickly. "Just me and the stars." His tone was breezy, but his fingers gripped the sketchbook tightly. The door opened once more, admitting Mrs. Lydia Holloway, her black lace dress rustling softly. Her lavender scent preceded her. The name. Reginald Thorpe, the rival dealer, had surfaced again. His quarrel with Elias a potential thread in the tapestry of motive. She recalled a case in St. Ives, where a business feud had masked a deeper betrayal. "Mr. Thorpe sounds formidable," she said. "Was he in the village recently?" Lydia hesitated, her fingers twisting the handkerchief. "I saw him at the Blue Boar 2 nights ago, arguing with Elias. Quite loudly." She glanced at Victor, who busied himself with papers. Victor cleared his throat. "Thorpe's all bluster. He'd never." He stopped, his twitch betraying unease. Miss Marple moved to a display of porcelain figurines, her cane tapping lightly. "Such delicate things," she murmured, lifting a shepherdess. Beneath it she spotted a faint ring of dust, as if something small had been recently removed. A clue, perhaps, or merely a careless dusting. She filed it away, her thoughts turning to the dagger. Its theatrical presence by Elias's body felt like a deliberate misdirection, and the vial's medicinal tang hinted at something subtler. Poison, she mused, was a woman's weapon, or a careful man's. As she browsed, the shop's bell rang again, and Clara Finch slipped in, her shawl clutched tightly. Her eyes darted to Victor, then Lydia, before settling on the floor. I came to pick up my last wages," she mumbled. "Mr. Holloway promised before he—" Her voice cracked, and she wrung her hands. Victor frowned. "Clara, we settled that when you left. Elias said—" "He promised," Clara snapped, her mousy demeanor flaring. "After all I did, scrubbing floors, fetching his precious relics." She caught herself, her cheeks flushing, and hurried out, the bell jangling in her wake. Miss Marple's eyes followed her. Clara's outburst was telling. Resentment ran deep, and her dismissal from the Holloway household was no simple matter. She recalled a maid in Chipping Cleghorn whose quiet fury had led to a cunning crime. Clara's basket, mentioned in the tea-room gossip, softening the edges of the village's thatched cottages and stone walls. The vicarage garden, a patchwork of roses, lavender, and neatly trimmed hedges, buzzed with the gentle hum of a community determined to reclaim its cheer after the grim discovery at Holloway Pier. The annual garden party, hosted by the kindly Reverend Clement and his bustling wife, Mrs. Clement, was a tradition that not even murder could disrupt. Villagers in their Sunday best mingled under a striped marquee, sipping lemonade and nibbling cucumber sandwiches, their laughter a brave counterpoint to the whispers of Elias Holloway's death. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a wicker chair beneath a sprawling oak, her knitting needles clicking softly, observed the scene with the quiet intensity of a chess master studying a board. The garden party, she knew, was no mere social affair. It was a stage where secrets slipped like petals from a fading bloom. The air was fragrant with roses and the faint tang of the river Mead, which glimmered beyond the vicarage lawn. Miss Marple's straw hat cast a dappled shadow across her lap, where her knitting, a pale blue shawl, grew steadily. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, darted from face to face, noting gestures, glances, and the subtle currents of tension beneath the polite chatter. The suspects in Elias's murder were all present, their interactions as telling as any clue found on the pier or in the antique shop. Mrs. Lydia Holloway stood near the refreshment table, her black lace dress a stark contrast to the pastel frocks around her. She held a glass of lemonade, her fingers delicate but steady, and conversed with Mrs. Clement about the church flower rhoda. Elias always admired the roses here, Lydia said, her voice soft but carrying. He'd have loved this. Her gaze flickered to Victor Blaine, who lingered nearby, adjusting his tie with a nervous twitch. Their eyes met briefly, and Miss Marple caught the faintest brush of Lydia's hand against Victor's as she passed him a plate of sandwiches. "Old friends," Lydia murmured when Mrs. Clement raised an eyebrow, but the gesture felt too intimate for mere friendship. Miss fingers strayed to the pocket watch, turning it over compulsively. Miss Marple noted the strain in his posture, the way his eyes darted to Lydia. Financial troubles, perhaps, or something more personal. She remembered a shopkeeper in Much Deeping whose nervous habits had masked embezzlement, and worse. Across the lawn, Neville Holloway lounged against a trellis, his sketchbook open as he scribbled a study of the rose garden. His dark curls fell into his eyes, and his tweed jacket bore a fresh smudge of charcoal. He was chatting with Clara Finch, the former maid, whose plain cotton dress and worn shawl stood out among the brighter attire. Their conversation, hushed but heated, drew Miss Marple's attention. "You know nothing of our family secrets," Neville hissed, his voice barely carrying over the clink of teacups. Clara's face flushed, her hands twisting her shawl. "I know enough," she retorted, her voice trembling. "You think you're above it all, but I saw." She stopped, her eyes darting to the crowd, and hurried toward the hedge, her steps quick and unsteady. Miss Marple's knitting resumed, the needles a soft metronome. Clara's outburst and Neville's defensiveness were threads in a growing pattern. Clara's dismissal from the Holloway household, coupled with her presence by the river at dawn, suggested a grudge, or knowledge she wasn't sharing. Neville's late-night sketching at the pier, now paired with this secretive exchange, hinted at a deeper involvement. Miss Marple recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead whose whispered arguments had led to a stolen will. What had Clara seen? And why was Neville so quick to silence her? The party's chatter swelled as a new figure arrived. Uninvited and drawing gasps, Reginald Thorpe, the burly antique dealer from Danbury. His tweed coat strained at the shoulders, and his booming voice cut through the crowd as he greeted Reverend Clement. "Thought I'd pay my respects," Thorpe said, his tone hearty but his eyes scanning the gathering. "Elias and I," she declared to a cluster of women, her voice shrill with importance. "Wearing a cloak, dark as night, just like Mr. Thorpe's. I told Constable Fletcher, I did." The women gasped, their eyes darting to Thorpe, who laughed it off, claiming he'd been in Danbury all night. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The cloak story was convenient, too convenient, like a poorly knitted stitch that unraveled under scrutiny. Red herrings, she knew, were as common in murder as daisies in a meadow, but this one felt planted. As the party continued, Miss Marple observed smaller details. Lydia's lavender sachet tucked into her sleeve matched the scent from the antique shop's vial. Victor's watch ticked louder in the quiet moments, its rhythm uneven, as if it carried a secret. Neville's sketchbook, briefly opened, revealed a drawing of the pier with a shadow that didn't match the dawn's light. Artistic license, or something more? Clara, now lingering by the gate, clutched her shawl as if it were a shield, her eyes avoiding Neville's. And Thorpe, his joviality forced, kept glancing at the dagger, now in police custody but displayed briefly for the coroner's inspection. A prop, Miss Marple suspected, in a larger deception. The vicar called for a toast to community spirit, and glasses clinked under the marquee. Miss Marple raised her lemonade, her smile serene but her mind racing. The garden party was a microcosm of St. Mary Mead's tensions. Lydia's subtle touches, Victor's nervous tics, Neville's heated whispers, Clara's quiet fury, Thorpe's bold intrusion. Each suspect played a role, their motives tangled like ivy. The dagger, she was increasingly certain, was a distraction. Its blood, perhaps not even Elias's, staged to mislead. The true method of murder, she suspected, lay in something less dramatic, hidden in the ordinary details she so loved to unravel. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Miss Marple gathered her knitting and rose, thanking Mrs. Clement for a lovely afternoon. Suspicions, bringing the truth one stitch closer. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Shadows. The twilight of St. Mary Mead draped the village in a soft violet hush, the kind that made even the most ordinary corners seem laden with secrets. The river Mead, its waters catching the last glimmers of daylight, whispered past Holloway Pier, where the memory of Elias Holloway's lifeless form still lingered like a stubborn fog. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl wrapped tightly against the evening chill, walked along the towpath with Constable Tom Fletcher, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the packed earth. The young constable, his freckled face earnest under his cap, had agreed to share details of the investigation, though Miss Marple suspected he was as eager for her insights as she was for his facts. The pier loomed ahead, its weathered boards cordoned off with rope, a silent sentinel in the gathering dusk. For Miss Marple, this stroll was no mere exercise. It was a chance to sift through the shadows of both place and people, where the truth of Elias's murder hid in plain sight. "Tell me about the body, Constable," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as the breeze rustling the reeds. "Anything unusual? Beyond the dagger?" Fletcher adjusted his notebook, his brow furrowing. "Well, miss, it's queer. The doctor says the wound wasn't deep. Barely a scratch, really. Not enough to kill a man. And there were no struggle marks, no bruises. The blood, though." He hesitated, glancing at the pier. "It was odd, miss. Not as much as you'd expect from a stabbing, and it looked, well, staged almost, like it was smeared on after." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "Staged, you say? How very interesting." Her mind ticked like one of the clocks in Holloway's antique emporium, piecing together fragments from the tea room, the shop, and the garden party. A shallow wound, minimal blood, no struggle. The dagger with its ornate hilt was increasingly a prop in a clever charade. Recognition. The dagger was a red herring, as she'd suspected. Its theatrical presence meant to distract from the true method. Poison, she thought, was likely. Perhaps in that digestive tonic from the shop. She recalled the vial's medicinal tang and Victor's nervous dismissal of it. "Thank you, Constable," she said. "You've been most helpful." As they parted, Miss Marple lingered by the river, her eyes scanning the bank. A cluster of foxglove plants caught her attention, their purple bells swaying gently. Digitalis, she knew, could stop a heart if misused. A quiet killer, easily hidden in a tonic. The thought settled like a stitch in her mental knitting, connecting to Clara Finch's knowledge of herbs, mentioned by Dolly after the garden party. Clara, the dismissed maid, had tended the Holloway's garden before her departure. A coincidence? Miss Marple doubted it. Back at her cottage, Dolly greeted her with a steaming kettle and fresh gossip. "Clara Finch was seen again, miss, by the river this morning, looking ever so upset. Mrs. Pritchett says she was carrying that basket, like she's hiding something. And Neville Holloway. He was at the pier again last night, sketching, they say." "Odd, isn't it?" "Very odd," Miss Marple agreed, settling into her armchair with her knitting. "Clara's basket intrigues me, Dolly. And Neville's nocturnal habits are suggestive." She recalled Neville's sketchbook, its pier drawing heavy with unnatural shadows, and Clara's outburst in the antique shop. Both were threads in a pattern, but the pattern remained elusive. Determined to pursue Clara's story, Miss Marple visited her cottage the next morning, a humble dwelling at the village's edge, its garden overgrown with herbs and wildflowers. Clara answered the door, her mousy hair tucked under a cap, her eyes wary. "Miss Marple? What brings you here?" Her hands twisted a dishcloth, calloused from years of service. "I thought we might chat, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone as warm as a summer afternoon. "About your—" "Too early to say." "And Mr. Holloway's tonic?" Miss Marple asked gently. "You prepared it sometimes, didn't you?" Clara nodded, hesitant. "He liked it strong, said it helped his stomach. I'd mix it from the apothecary's recipe. Nothing harmful, I swear." Her eyes darted to a shelf where a small basket sat, filled with dried herbs, mint, chamomile, and, Miss Marple noted, a sprig of foxglove, quickly tucked out of sight. Miss Marple smiled, her mind racing. Clara's knowledge of herbs, her access to the tonic, and her presence by the river were no coincidence. Yet her fear seemed genuine, suggesting she was a pawn rather than a mastermind. "Thank you, Clara," she said, rising. "You've been most helpful." Her next stop was the antique shop, where Victor Blaine was sorting ledgers with a furrowed brow. The shop was quieter today, its clocks ticking mournfully. "Miss Marple," Victor greeted, his twitch more pronounced. "Still curious about Elias's treasures?" "Always," she replied, her eyes settling on the counter where the tonic vial had been. It was gone, replaced by a stack of papers. "I understand Mr. Holloway's business wasn't entirely smooth. Financial troubles, perhaps?" Victor's hand froze mid-page. "Well, partnerships have their strains. Elias was careless with funds. I found discrepancies in the ledgers, money missing, accounts unbalanced. I confronted him, but he brushed it off." His voice was tight, and the pocket watch gleamed as he tugged it from his waistcoat. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked if she'd been knitting. Embezzlement or a frame? Victor's nerves suggested guilt, but the watch, Elias's initials bold on its surface, hinted at something personal, perhaps a theft to cover debts. She recalled a case in Chipping Cleghorn where a stolen heirloom had pointed to a desperate man. As she left the shop, Dolly's earlier gossip resurfaced. Neville's late-night sketching, Clara's basket, and a new rumor about Reginald Thorpe. They say convenient scapegoat, his cloak a planted distraction. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled in the firelight. The shadows of St. Mary Mead were deepening, but she was no stranger to their ways. The truth, like a perfect stitch, was there, waiting for her patient hands to draw it forth. Chapter 6. The Midnight Meeting. The moon hung full and luminous over St. Mary Mead, casting a silver glow across the thatched roofs and the winding river Mead. Its light shimmered on the water, turning Holloway Pier into a ghostly silhouette, its weathered boards silent, but heavy with the memory of Elias Holloway's death. The village slept, its cottages dark save for the occasional flicker of a bedside lamp, but Miss Jane Marple was wide awake. From her bedroom window, the curtains parted just enough. She gazed at the distant pier, her sharp eyes catching a fleeting movement. A figure, no, two, stood in the shadows, their outlines blurred by the mist. Her knitting lay forgotten in her lap, her mind as alert as a cat watching a mouse. Sleep could wait. The night, she knew, often revealed what daylight concealed. The air was cool and damp as Miss Marple, wrapped in a woolen shawl, slipped on her sturdy shoes and crept downstairs. Dolly, her maid, was snoring softly in her room, oblivious to her mistress's nocturnal mission. Miss Marple didn't intend to venture out. She was no fool at her age. But her window offered a clear view of the pier, and her opera glasses, a relic from her youth, brought the scene into focus. The figures were unmistakable. Neville Holloway, his lanky frame unmistakable even in silhouette, and Mrs. Lydia Holloway, her elegant posture betraying her despite the darkness. They stood close, too close, their heads bent in urgent conversation. Then, to Miss Marple's surprise, Neville's arms encircled Lydia in a brief but unmistakable embrace. A whispered word, a soft laugh, and they parted. Neville vanishing into the shadows toward the village. She poisoned him, miss? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind elsewhere. Poison is possible, Dolly. But we mustn't rush to judgment. People's actions at night are often more telling than their daytime words. She didn't mention the midnight meeting. She preferred to keep that thread to herself for now. But Clara's repeated appearances by the river and Thorpe's bluster added to her mental skein. Determined to test Neville's story, Miss Marple visited him at the small studio he rented above the village bakery. The room was cluttered with canvases, the air thick with the scent of turpentine and charcoal. Neville, in a paint-splattered smock, greeted her with his usual grin. "Miss Marple, come to see my masterpieces?" He gestured to a half-finished painting of the pier, its shadows stark and brooding. "Very striking," she said, her eyes scanning the sketchbook on his table. The pier drawing from the antique shop was there, its lines even darker than she remembered, with a faint figure in the background. A woman, perhaps? "You were sketching at the pier last night, I hear. The moonlight must be inspiring." Neville's grin faltered, his hand brushing the sketchbook. "Oh yes, couldn't resist the light. Just me and the river, you know." He flipped the book shut, his fingers lingering. "Uncle's death has me all out of sorts. He promised me funds for this place, but now—" Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her gaze soft but piercing. "It must be difficult, waiting for promises to be kept. Did you see anyone else at the pier? Mrs. Holloway, perhaps?" Neville's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Lydia? No, she's grieving, you know. Keeps to herself." His voice was too quick, his hands fidgeting with a paintbrush. "Uncle found out about my plans, wanted me to settle down. But we didn't kill him, if that's what you're thinking." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "My dear boy, I think nothing yet. I only observe." But her mind was racing. Neville's denial was too vehement, and that embrace suggested a motive. Perhaps bluster was convincing, but Miss Marple noted a bead of sweat on his brow. A witness had placed him arguing with Elias, but his alibi held. For now. She recalled a rival in Netherwallop whose loud denials had masked a quieter crime. Thorpe's cloak, mentioned by Mrs. Pritchett, was likely a planted clue. But his presence in St. Mary Mead so soon after the murder was no coincidence. Back at the pier that afternoon, Miss Marple met Constable Fletcher, who shared a new development. "The lab results came in, miss. The blood on the dagger? Mostly dye with just a trace of Elias's blood, likely from a post-mortem cut. And that tonic vial from the shop? Traces of digitalis, foxglove poison. Elias was poisoned, slow-like, over weeks. The dagger was just a show." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A clever show, Constable. Someone wanted us to look at the dagger, not the tonic." The foxglove she'd seen by the river and in Clara's basket now loomed large. Digitalis, subtle and deadly, could weaken a heart until it stopped, masking murder as natural death. The staged dagger with its theatrical dye was a distraction to buy time. She visited Clara Finch's cottage again, finding the young woman tending her herb garden. Clara's hands trembled as she pulled weeds, her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. "I've done nothing wrong, miss," she said before Miss Marple could speak. I know herbs, yes, but I'd never use foxglove like that. Miss Marple's tone was gentle. No one's accusing you, dear. But you mixed Mr. Holloway's tonic, didn't you? And you were at the river often, perhaps gathering something special? Clara's face paled. Just herbs for tea, like I said. I owed Mr. Holloway nothing, but I didn't harm him. Her voice broke and she turned away, clutching a sprig of mint. Miss Marple left gently over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft pinks and golds as the river Mead sparkled with the promise of a new day. Holloway Pier, though still roped off, seemed less ominous in the morning light, its weathered boards holding secrets that Miss Jane Marple was determined to unravel. The elderly spinster sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she sipped her morning tea, her mind weaving together the threads of Elias Holloway's murder. The midnight meeting between Neville and Lydia, the poisoned tonic, the staged dagger, and the whispers of motives, greed, betrayal, resentment, formed a tapestry that was beginning to take shape. Today, she sensed, would bring crucial discoveries, the kind that tightened the stitches of truth. Miss Marple's first task was to revisit the pier, where the morning mist clung to the riverbank like a gossamer veil. Constable Tom Fletcher, ever diligent, met her there, his notebook open and his freckled face earnest. "Morning, Miss Marple," he greeted, tipping his cap. "We've had a breakthrough. The dagger. It's not just clean, it's coated in a red dye, not blood. And the trace of Elias's blood? Applied after death, likely from a small cut made to stage the scene." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "A clever ruse, Constable. The dye confirms our suspicions. The dagger was meant to mislead. And the tonic? Any further results?" Fletcher nodded, flipping a page. The lab found digitalis in Elias's system, built up over weeks. The tonic vial had enough to weaken his heart, and the final dose likely stopped it. No fingerprints, though. Wiped clean. "Wiped clean," Miss Marple mused, her gaze drifting to the foxglove plants along the bank, their purple bells swaying innocently. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Digitalis, derived from foxglove, was a subtle killer, its effects mimicking natural heart failure. She recalled a case in Much Benham where a gardener's knowledge had turned deadly. Clara Finch, with her herbal expertise and grudge against betrayal. She recalled a case in St. Ives where a pilfered keepsake had pointed to a desperate man. As she browsed the shelves, her eyes fell on a ledger tucked beneath a stack of papers. "May I?" she asked, gesturing. Victor hesitated, then nodded, his fingers twitching. The ledger revealed discrepancies, missing funds, inflated sales, and notes in Elias's hand questioning Victor's accounting. "These look troubling," Miss Marple said mildly. "Did Mr. Holloway suspect you of mismanagement?" Victor's face paled. "He was mistaken. I tried to explain, but he was stubborn, threatened to dissolve the partnership." His voice cracked and he turned away, busying himself with a figurine. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked if she'd been knitting. Victor's financial motives were clear. Embezzlement, discovered by Elias, could have driven him to poison. The watch, a personal trophy, strengthened the thread. But the midnight meeting between Neville and Lydia nagged at her. suggesting another layer of deceit. She sought out Neville next, finding him at the village hall, where he was setting up an impromptu art display to lift spirits. His sketchbook lay open, revealing yet another pier drawing, this one with a faint outline of a woman in black lace. Lydia, surely. "Mr. Holloway," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but direct. "Your sketches are remarkable. This figure, Mrs. Holloway, perhaps? I saw you both at the pier last night." Neville's charcoal snapped in his hand, his charming grin faltering. You must be mistaken, Miss Marple. I was alone, sketching. The moonlight, you know." His eyes darted to the sketchbook, which he quickly closed. "Lydia's just a friend. Uncle didn't approve of my lifestyle, that's all." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Of course, dear. But family secrets can be heavy, can't they?" Neville's denial was weak, and the embrace she'd witnessed suggested a motive. Perhaps Elias had threatened to cut Neville from his will over the affair. She recalled a young heir in Chipping Cleghorn whose impatience suggesting she was a tool, not the mastermind. The lavender connection, though, was troubling. Lydia's scent, the shop's sachet, and now Clara's kitchen. Was it coincidence or a deliberate clue? Her final inquiry took her to the Blue Boar Inn, where Reginald Thorpe was nursing a pint, his booming voice subdued. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his eyes wary. "Still playing detective? I told the constable I was in Danbury when Elias died. No cloak, no murder." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, settling nearby. "But your walking stick at the garden party, muddy, from the riverbank, I presume. And I found this." She produced a small foxglove petal, plucked from the pier's edge, its color matching the mud on his stick. "Curious, don't you think?" Thorpe's face reddened. "I walked by the river days ago, that's all. Elias cheated me, yes, but I'd not stoop to poison." His alibi held, confirmed by the Red Lion's landlord. But his presence near the pier was no accident. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a soft rhythm. The clues were aligning. The dyed dagger, a theatrical ruse. The digitalis laced tonic, the true killer. Victor's stolen watch and ledger discrepancies. Neville and Lydia's illicit embrace. Clara's herbal knowledge and lavender scent. Thorpe's muddy stick and foxglove petal. The murder was no impulsive act, but a calculated plan. The poison administered over weeks to mask death as natural. The dagger, smeared with dye and a trace of Elias's blood, was a final flourish to mislead. Miss Marple's mind wove the threads tighter. Victor's embezzlement, discovered by Elias, gave him motive and access to the tonic. Neville and Lydia's affair, if known to Elias, threatened their inheritance and reputation. Clara's resentment and foxglove expertise made her a possible accomplice, though her fear suggested manipulation. Thorpe's rivalry was plausible, but his alibi weakened his role as the mastermind. But her patient gaze was deeper still, ready to unravel the final knot. Chapter 8. The Final Pieces. The late morning sun cast a warm glow over St. Mary Mead, its golden rays filtering through the elms and dappling the cobblestones of High Street. The village, though still abuzz with whispers of Elias Holloway's murder, carried on with its daily rhythms. The baker's boy whistling as he delivered loaves, the postman rattling his bicycle, and the sparrows chattering in the hedgerows. Yet, beneath this serene surface, tensions simmered like a kettle on a low flame. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her small dining table with a pot of Earl Grey, felt the threads of the mystery tightening. The dyed dagger, the poisoned tonic, the midnight meeting, the foxglove, and the motives of greed, betrayal, and resentment were weaving into a pattern that was nearly complete. Today, she resolved, would bring the final pieces to light, and she invited the suspects to her cottage for tea, a setting as disarming as it was deliberate. The parlor was cozy, its lace curtains fluttering in the breeze, the air scented with lavender from a bowl of potpourri. Miss Marple's knitting lay in her basket, her needles silent for now, but her mind clicked with the precision of a well-tuned clock. She had arranged the gathering with care, asking Constable Tom Fletcher to join as a quiet observer, his presence a subtle reminder of authority. The suspects arrived one by one, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease, as if sensing the net closing around them. Mrs. Lydia Holloway entered first, her black lace dress impeccable, her lavender scent wafting as she settled on the chintz sofa. "Miss Marple, how thoughtful of you to invite us," she said, her voice smooth but her eyes wary. "Though I can't imagine what more there is to discuss." Victor Blaine followed, his sharp suit creased, his nervous twitch more pronounced. The gold pocket watch, Elias's initials gleaming, dangled from his waistcoat, a silent accusation. A tea party, Miss Victor's twitching fingers, Neville's clenched jaw, Clara's trembling hands. She began with a gentle probe. "The dagger, for instance," she said, passing a plate of scones. "Such a dramatic touch, yet it was coated in red dye, not blood. A clever distraction, don't you think, Constable?" Fletcher, seated quietly by the window, nodded. "Aye, miss. The lab confirmed it. Mostly dye with just a trace of Elias's blood added post-mortem. The real killer was digitalis in his tonic." Lydia's cup clinked against its saucer. "Poison," she murmured, her composure slipping. "How dreadful." Victor's twitch intensified. "Elias drank that tonic daily. Anyone could have tampered with it." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her gaze settling on Clara. "You mixed it sometimes, didn't you, Clara? With your knowledge of herbs." Clara's eyes widened, her voice a squeak. "I did, miss, but only as he asked. Mint, chamomile, nothing harmful. I swear I didn't." She broke off, tears welling, and Miss Marple patted her hand. "No one's accusing you, dear," she said, though her mind noted Clara's access to foxglove, seen in her garden and by the river. Clara's fear suggested truth, but perhaps not the whole truth. Miss Marple turned to Victor. "Mr. Blaine, those ledgers in the shop were most revealing. Missing funds, questionable sales. Elias suspected you, didn't he? Threatened to end your partnership?" Victor's face paled, his fingers clutching the watch. "He was wrong. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. I didn't need to kill him." His voice was shrill, and Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow. The watch, stolen or kept as a trophy, was a damning thread. "And you, Mr. Holloway," she said, facing Neville. "Your sketches of the pier are so detailed, almost too detailed. I saw you there last night, with Mrs. Holloway. Quite a late hour for color." "That's nonsense. He promised me funds for my studio." His voice cracked, and Lydia's hand fluttered to her throat. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The will was a motive, tying Neville and Lydia together. Had Elias discovered their affair? But the poison's slow work pointed to a colder mind. Victor, perhaps, with his financial woes, or even Lydia, her elegance masking calculation. Then came the final piece. Miss Marple produced a small glove found near the pier by a villager and handed to Fletcher. It was monogrammed with VB and bore traces of digitalis residue. "This was found where Elias fell," she said, holding it up. "Careless, Mr. Blaine, to leave such a thing behind." Victor's twitch became a tremor. "That's not mine. Anyone could have planted it." His voice rose, but his eyes betrayed panic. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind weaving the final threads. The dyed dagger, a distraction. The digitalis lace tonic, the true killer. Victor's embezzlement and stolen watch. Neville and Lydia's affair and the altered will. Clara's herbs and lavender scent. The glove, a damning clue. The poison had been administered over weeks, requiring access and patience. Victor, with his daily presence in the shop, was the strongest thread. But Lydia's lavender and Neville's sketches couldn't be ignored. Clara broke the silence, her voice trembling. I mixed the tonic, but on orders. Mr. Blaine told me to add a special herb. He said it was for Elias's health." She burst into tears, and Victor lunged to his feet, his face ashen. "That's a lie," he shouted, but Fletcher stepped forward, his hand on his notebook. Miss Marple's voice was calm. "It's the little things, Mr. Blaine. The watch you couldn't part with, the ledgers you couldn't balance, the glove you couldn't hide. Elias found you out, didn't he? And you couldn't let him ruin you." The room was silent, save for Clara's sobs and the ticking of the mantel clock. The mist curled like a gentle veil. Constable Tom Fletcher stood nearby, his notebook ready, his young face taut with anticipation. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and foxglove, and Miss Marple, her shawl snug and her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, stood poised like a conductor before an orchestra. The threads of the mystery, the dyed dagger, the poisoned tonic, the midnight meeting, the glove, were woven tightly now, and it was time to pull the final stitch. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice as calm as the river's murmur. "It's fitting we meet here where poor Mr. Holloway met his end. Not by a dagger, as we were meant to believe, but by a subtler hand." Her gaze swept over the group, noting Lydia's rigid posture, Victor's twitching fingers, Neville's clenched jaw, Clara's trembling hands, and Thorpe's wary scowl. Observation, you see, reveals what haste obscures. And I've observed much. Lydia adjusted her black lace dress, her lavender scent faint but unmistakable. "Miss Marple, this is hardly the place for speculation," she said, her voice sharp. "Elias's death was a tragedy, but surely the police—" "The police have done admirably," Miss Marple interrupted gently, nodding to Fletcher. "But the truth lies in the details. The dagger, for instance, was no murder weapon. Its blade bore red dye, not blood, with only a trace of Elias's, applied after death. The real killer was digitalis, foxglove poison, in his digestive tonic, administered over weeks until his heart gave out. Victor's hand strayed to the gold pocket watch, engraved with Elias's initials, his twitch betraying him. "That's preposterous," he snapped. "Anyone could have tampered with that tonic. Elias drank it constantly." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her eyes narrowing. "But not anyone had your access, Mr. Blaine. You worked daily in the antique shop, where the vial was kept, and those ledgers, showing missing funds, with Elias's notes accusing you of embezzlement. Composure cracking." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said softly. "The letter found in the shop, a will cutting you out for disloyalty, tells a different story. Elias knew, and he was going to disinherit you. A powerful reason to act, don't you think?" Lydia's voice was icy. "This is outrageous. I loved Elias, despite our differences. Neville's just a boy, fond of his aunt. You're weaving fantasies, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's smile was serene but unyielding. "Not fantasies, Mrs. Holloway. Facts. Your lavender scent, so distinctive, was near the tonic vial in the shop, and a sachet matching it was in Clara's cottage. A curious link, wouldn't you say?" Clara gasped, her hands wringing her shawl. "I didn't do it, miss. I mixed the tonic, yes, but only as Mr. Blaine told me. He said to add a special herb for Elias's health." Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. Victor lunged forward, his face contorted. "She's lying. I never told her any such thing." But Fletcher stepped closer, his hand on his notebook, ready to act. Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice steady. "Let's consider the glove found here at the pier, monogrammed with VB and laced with digitalis residue. Careless, Mr. Blaine, to leave it behind when you staged the scene." She produced the glove, holding it up in the dawn light. "You poisoned Elias's tonic over weeks, weakening his heart. That night he collapsed, naturally, from the digitalis. You smeared dye and a trace of his blood on the dagger, making it look like a stabbing. A clever ruse, but not clever enough." Victor's twitch became a tremor, his eyes wild. "You meddling old bat. You've got no proof." He took a step toward her, but Fletcher seized his arm, restraining him. "Proof enough," Miss Marple said calmly. "The ledgers show your embezzlement. Thousands missing. Discovered by Elias. The watch you couldn't part with was his, a trophy of your scapegoat." Thorpe grunted, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Told you I was in Danbury. Elias was a cheat, but I didn't touch him." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze returning to Victor. "It was you, Mr. Blaine. Elias's discovery of your theft threatened ruin. You used Clara's herbal knowledge, slipping digitalis into the tonic she prepared. You staged the dagger to mislead, but the glove betrayed you. The little things, you see, always tell." Victor struggled against Fletcher's grip, his voice a snarl. "You've got nothing but guesses. That glove could be anyone's." But his eyes darting to the river betrayed his guilt. Fletcher tightened his hold. "We'll let the magistrate decide, Mr. Blaine. The glove, the ledgers, the tonic, it's enough for now." He glanced at Miss Marple, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, miss. You've a knack for this." The group stood in stunned silence, the dawn light casting long shadows across the pier. Clara's sobs softened, Lydia's composure shattered, and Neville's face was a mask of shame. Thorpe shuffled awkwardly, his bluster gone. Victor's defiance crumbled, his shoulders slumping as Fletcher led him away. Miss Marple gazed at the river, its surface calm but its depths hiding secrets now revealed. "People are so predictable," she murmured, almost to herself. "Greed twists the soul, and love complicates it." The pier, once a place of horror, felt cleansed in the morning light, its story told. As the suspects dispersed, Lydia and Neville avoiding each other's eyes, Clara weeping softly, Thorpe muttering about his reputation, Miss Marple lingered, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. The foxglove by the bank nodded, its danger exposed. The truth, like a perfect stitch, had come clear, and St. Mary Mead could breathe again. She turned toward home, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm. One chapter remained, to explain it all over tea, where the village's warmth would soften the sting of betrayal. The pier, the tonic, the glove, the wine invited a small gathering. Reverend Clement, his wife Mrs. Clement, Constable Tom Fletcher, and her maid Dolly, to share the explanation over morning tea. The truth, now clear, deserved the village's warmth to soften its edges. Miss Marple poured tea with steady hands, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. Her knitting lay in its basket, silent for now. But her mind was as active as ever, weaving the final threads of the mystery into a coherent pattern. "It's the little things, you see," she began, passing a cup to Reverend Clement, whose kind face was creased with curiosity. "People are predictable, yet their secrets surprise us. Elias Holloway's death was no simple stabbing, but a careful plan, hidden in the ordinary." Dolly, perched on the edge of her chair, her apron smoothed nervously, leaned forward. "Oh, miss, was it really Mr. Blaine? All that poison and dye, it's like something from a book." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles clicking in her mind. "Indeed, Dolly. Victor Blaine was the architect of this tragedy, driven by greed and fear. But let's start at the beginning, shall we?" She sipped her tea, her voice calm but commanding, as if narrating a familiar tale. Elias Holloway was found on the pier, a dagger beside him, blood on his shirt. At first it seemed a violent act, but the dagger was a lie, coated in red dye with only a trace of Elias's blood applied after death. The true killer was digitalis from Foxglove, slipped into his digestive tonic over weeks, weakening his heart until it stopped. Reverend Clement adjusted his spectacles, his brow furrowed. "Digitalis, such a subtle poison. Who would have the knowledge and the access?" "Precisely," Miss Marple said, offering a scone to Mrs. Clement, who nodded eagerly. Victor Blaine had both. As Elias's business partner, he was in the antique shop, admitted to mixing the tonic. But under Victor's instructions, he told her to add a special herb, foxglove, disguised as medicine. Clara, with her knowledge of herbs from tending the Holloway's garden, didn't suspect harm. Her resentment toward Elias, for dismissing her without wages, made her a convenient suspect. But her fear was genuine. "She's found new employment now with the vicarage, I believe." She glanced at Mrs. Clement, who nodded. "Yes, we've taken her on," Mrs. Clement said. Poor girl was beside herself, but she's honest at heart. Dolly, unable to contain herself, blurted, "And Mrs. Holloway and Neville? All that talk of them meeting at night. Were they in on it?" Miss Marple's needles would have clicked if she'd been knitting. "A fair question, Dolly. Mrs. Lydia Holloway and Neville Holloway were entangled in a secret affair, which I witnessed at the pier under moonlight. Elias discovered it, as evidenced by his will, found in a hollowed-out book in the shop. It cut Neville out entirely, citing disloyalty. This gave them motive, certainly. Lydia to preserve her status, Neville to secure his inheritance for his art studio. But their role was distraction, not murder. Victor used their scandal to muddy the waters, knowing suspicion would fall on them. Reverend Clement shook his head. Such deceit in our little village. And Mr. Thorpe, the dealer from Danbury, he seemed so angry with Elias. Another distraction, Miss Marple said, passing the jam. Reginald Thorpe's rivalry over a fake vase was real, but his alibi, confirmed by the Red Lion in Danbury, held firm. The rumor of his cloak at the pier, spread by Mrs. Pritchett, was likely planted, perhaps by Victor, to shift blame. Thorpe's muddy walking stick, with foxglove petals, placed him near the river. But he was no killer, merely a convenient scapegoat. Fletcher leaned forward, his eyes bright. "It all fits, miss. The ledgers, the glove, the tonic. Victor's the one. He's in custody now. T. And what of Lydia and Neville? Will they face trouble?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Their affair was foolish but not criminal. Lydia's reflected on her actions, I hear. She's planning to travel, perhaps to clear her mind. Neville's inherited enough, despite the will, to fund his studio, though he'll need to mend his ways. The village will talk, but time heals gossip." Reverend Clement nodded thoughtfully. "You've done a great service, Miss Marple. St. Mary Mead owes you much." Miss Marple waved a hand, her smile modest. "I only observe, Vicar. The truth is there, in the everyday, lavender scents, nervous twitches, sketches with shadows. It's like knitting, one stitch at a time, and the pattern emerges." The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the parlor. Dolly cleared the plates, her chatter filling the silence. "It's like a miracle, miss. You saw it all, clear as day. Will the pier be safe now?" "Safe as ever," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "The river keeps its secrets, but we've teased this one free." She glanced out the window where the pier stood in the distance, its pilings steady against the current. St. Mary Mead was itself again, its rhythms restored. Children playing, neighbors gossiping, the church bell chiming noon. As her guests rose to leave, thanking her for the tea and the tale, Miss Marple settled back in her armchair, reaching for her knitting. The blue shawl grew under her needles, each stitch a quiet victory. Victor Blaine would face justice. Clara would rebuild. Lydia and Neville would learn. And Thorpe would return to Danbury, his bluster tempered. The foxglove by the river would bloom. But its danger was known, its power no longer hidden. "People are so very human," Miss Marple murmured to herself, her needles clicking softly. "And truth, like a good cup of tea, always comes clear in time." The village hummed outside, its peace restored, and Miss Marple, ever watchful, resumed her work, ready for the next thread to unravel in St. Mary Mead's gentle tapestry.